The sound of a pistol shot echoed through the dusty streets of Silverridge, Montana, as Colton Shaw rode into town, his weathered hat pulled low over his tired eyes. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild with promise and peril in equal measure. His journey had been long, his heart heavy with memories of a life left behind, but fate had other plans for the man who had spent the last decade drifting from one frontier town to another. Colton dismounted his chestnut mare outside the local saloon, his spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk as he tied his horse to the hitching post. He was 32 years old, with sun-hardened skin and eyes that had seen too much of life's harsh realities. The last thing he expected to find in Silverridge was a reason to stay, much less a reason to hope again. The saloon doors swung open as he approached, releasing the sounds of piano music and boisterous conversation into the street. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of whiskey. Colton made his way to the bar, ordering a drink and turning to survey his new surroundings. That's when he saw her. Olivia Blackett stood behind the piano, her auburn hair catching the dim lamplight as she instructed a young boy on the proper fingering for a scale. She wore a simple blue dress, modest by saloon standards, and there was something in the gentle way she spoke to the child that caught Colton's attention. "That's Miss Olivia," the barkeep said, noticing Colton's gaze. "Came to town about 3 years ago. Teaches music to the children and helps out here in the evenings." "She works in a saloon?" Colton asked, surprised by the contradiction of a woman who taught children also spending time in an establishment most decent women avoided. The barkeep chuckled. "Not like that, owner's her uncle. She plays piano some nights, helps with the books. Respectable woman, Miss Olivia. Half the men in town have tried courting her, but she keeps to herself mostly." Colton nodded, lifting his whiskey to his lips as he continued to watch her. There was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in the rowdy saloon. As if sensing his scrutiny, Olivia looked up, her green eyes meeting his across the room. For a moment, neither looked away until finally Colton tipped his hat slightly in acknowledgement. A hint of a smile touched her lips before she returned her attention to her young pupil. "Passing through?" the barkeep asked, interrupting Colton's thoughts. "Was planning on it," he replied, still watching Olivia. "But I might stay a while if there's work to be found. Sheriff's been looking for a deputy. Old one got himself shot chasing cattle rustlers last month." Colton considered this. He'd worn a badge before in a town far from here before everything had fallen apart. It wasn't a life he'd sought to return to, but perhaps it was time to stop running. "Might talk to him tomorrow," Colton said, finishing his drink. "For now, I need a place to stay." Widow Peterson rents rooms above the general store, clean, quiet, and fair-priced. With a nod of thanks, Colton left some coins on the counter and headed for the door. As he passed the piano, Olivia looked up again, this time with curiosity in her gaze. "New to town?" she asked, her voice softer than he expected. "Just arrived," he confirmed, stopping a respectful distance from her. "Colton Shaw, Olivia Blackett," she replied. "Welcome to Silverridge, Mr. Shaw." "Thank you, Miss Blackett." He nodded politely before continuing toward the door, aware that several pairs of eyes in the saloon were watching their brief exchange with interest. Outside, the evening air had cooled, and Colton led his horse toward the general store, his mind still on the woman at the piano. It had been a long time since anyone had caught his attention so immediately, and longer still since he'd allowed himself to care. The next morning, Colton presented himself at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Harland was a gruff man in his 50s, with a thick gray mustache and shrewd eyes that evaluated Colton carefully. "Got experience?" he asked after Colton inquired about the deputy position. 2 years as deputy in Cottonwood, Arizona Territory, Colton replied honestly. "Before that, fought in the war." "Which side?" "Union." Sheriff Harland nodded slowly. "Why'd you leave Cottonwood?" Colton's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Lost my wife and son to fever, needed a change." The older man's expression softened slightly. "Sorry to hear it. Been carrying a badge long enough to know men run to or from something. You running from something I need to know about? No, sir, just the memories. After a moment's consideration, Harlan stood and extended his hand. Job pays $40 a month. You'll need your own gun, though we provide ammunition. Can you start today? By midday, Colton had pinned on the deputy's badge and begun familiarizing himself with Silverridge. It was a growing town with a population of nearly 800 souls. The silver mine 3 miles north provided most of the employment, though there were also cattle ranches in the surrounding areas. As he walked the main street, nodding to curious townspeople, a commotion outside the schoolhouse caught his attention. A group of children had gathered in a circle, their excited voices carrying on the breeze. At the center of the circle, a small girl of perhaps 5 or 6 years had fallen, her knees scraped and bleeding as she cried softly. Colton approached just as Olivia Blackett emerged from the schoolhouse doorway, rushing to the child's side. "Emma, what happened?" she asked, kneeling beside the girl despite her fine skirt touching the dusty ground. "I was running and I fell," the child sniffled, looking up at Olivia with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Let me see," Olivia said gently, examining the scraped knees. "It looks worse than it is. We'll clean you up and you'll be good as new." As she helped the child to her feet, Olivia noticed Colton standing nearby. "Deputy Shaw," she said, a note of surprise in her voice as she noticed the badge on his chest. "I see you've found employment already." "Yes, madam," he replied, removing his hat respectfully. "Sheriff Harland was kind enough to give me a chance." "Sheriff Harland is a good judge of character," she said, her eyes meeting his briefly before returning to the child at her side. "Come along, Emma, let's get you inside and take care of those knees." Colton watched as Olivia led the girl into the schoolhouse, struck by the tenderness in her manner. It reminded him painfully of Clara, his late wife, and the way she had cared for their son, Thomas. The memory brought both warmth and ache to his chest. Over the next few weeks, Colton settled into his role as deputy and into life in Silverridge. He rented a small cabin on the edge of town, establishing a quiet routine of work and solitude. Occasionally, he would see Olivia in town teaching at the schoolhouse, helping at her uncle's saloon, or attending Sunday services at the small white church. Each time their paths crossed, they exchanged polite greetings, but nothing more. Yet Colton found himself increasingly drawn to her, noticing small details. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she genuinely smiled, the patience she showed with even the most difficult children in her care. One afternoon in late October, as autumn painted the surrounding mountains with gold and crimson, Colton was making his rounds when a wagon careened into town, the driver shouting for a doctor. A mining accident had occurred and several men were badly injured. The next hours were chaos as the town mobilized to help. Dr. Morris tended to the worst cases in his small clinic, while others were treated in the hotel dining room, hastily converted to an infirmary. Colton helped carry men from wagons, hold them down during painful procedures, and deliver messages between the doctor and anxious family members gathering outside. In the midst of it all, he found himself working alongside Olivia, who had come to assist without being asked. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair tied back as she cleaned wounds and provided comfort to the injured miners. "You've done this before," Colton observed as they briefly paused, watching her skilled movements. Olivia nodded, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "My father was a doctor in St. Louis. I assisted him often before." She trailed off, then continued more firmly, before coming west. As the crisis slowly abated with 3 men dead and a dozen injured but stable, Colton found himself walking Olivia home through the darkened streets. She lived in a small house behind the schoolhouse, provided by the town as part of her teaching position. "Thank you for your help today," she said as they approached her door. "The men were fortunate to have someone so calm in a crisis." "I could say the same about you," he replied. "You'd have made a fine field nurse during the war." A shadow passed over her face at his words. "I sometimes wish I had been. Perhaps I could have saved more lives." The vulnerability in her voice stirred something in Colton. We can't save everyone, Miss Blackett. I learned that the hard way. Their eyes met in the moonlight, an unspoken understanding passing between them. For a moment it seemed as if she might say more, but instead she simply nodded. "Good night, Deputy Shaw," she said softly, turning toward her door. "Good night, Miss Blackett," he replied, waiting until she was safely inside before continuing on his way, his thoughts in turmoil. The following Sunday, after church services, Colton found himself walking beside Olivia as the congregation dispersed. "Miss Blackett," he began, gathering his courage, "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of joining me for dinner this evening." "At the hotel restaurant," he added quickly, wanting to be clear about his respectable intentions. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by what looked like genuine regret. "That's very kind of you, Deputy Shaw, but I'm afraid I have prior commitments this evening." "Of course," he said, hiding his disappointment. "Perhaps another time." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Emma, the little girl from the schoolyard incident who came running up to them. "Miss Annie," the child called out excitedly, then stopped short, looking embarrassed. "I mean, Miss Olivia, Mama says to thank you for the books you lent her." Olivia smiled at the child, though Colton noticed a tension in her posture that hadn't been there moments before. "You're very welcome, Emma. Tell your mother she can keep them as long as she likes." As Emma skipped away, Colton raised an eyebrow. "Miss Annie." "A childish confusion," Olivia said quickly. "I remind her of someone, I suppose." She glanced toward the church, where the Reverend was speaking with several parishioners. "If you'll excuse me, Deputy, I should speak with Reverend Thomas before he leaves." Before Colton could say more, she had hurried away, leaving him puzzled by both her refusal of his dinner invitation and her reaction to the child's mistake. Over the next few weeks, Colton noticed that Olivia seemed to be avoiding him. She was polite when they did encounter each other, but she no longer lingered to chat, and she always seemed to have a reason to be elsewhere when he was present. His confusion over her behavior was compounded by his growing feelings for her. Despite his best efforts to maintain professional distance, he found himself thinking of her more often than was wise, remembering the compassion she had shown during the mining crisis and the gentle way she interacted with her students. December arrived, bringing cold winds and the first snowfall to Silverridge. The town prepared for Christmas with decorations and plans for a community celebration at the church. Colton, having nowhere else to go and no family to visit, volunteered to take the Christmas Eve patrol shift so that Sheriff Harland could spend the evening with his wife and grown children. As he walked the quiet streets that night, with most of the town at the church service or gathered in homes with loved ones, Colton felt the weight of his solitude more keenly than usual. The windows of houses glowed with warm light, and occasionally he could hear laughter or singing from within. His patrol took him past Olivia's small house, where a single candle burned in the window. He hesitated, then continued on, respecting her privacy even as he wondered why she wasn't at the church service with the rest of the town. The answer came unexpectedly an hour later when he noticed a small figure huddled on the steps of the general store, closed for the holiday. Drawing closer, he was startled to recognize Emma, the little girl from the schoolyard, sobbing quietly into her mittened hands. "Emma," he said gently, crouching down to her level. "What are you doing out here alone on Christmas Eve? Aren't your parents looking for you?" The child looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I ran away. Mama is going to be so mad, but I wanted to see Miss Annie for Christmas." There was that name again, Miss Annie. Colton frowned slightly. "Your mama must be very worried about you," he said, offering his hand. "Let me take you home." "But I want to see Miss Annie," Emma insisted, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Miss Olivia, you mean?" Emma nodded, then shook her head in confusion. "Miss Olivia is Miss Annie. She's my mama's friend from before, from the bad place." Colton's frown deepened. "The bad place." Before Emma could respond, a frantic voice called out, "Emma, Emma." A woman rushed toward them, relief evident on her face as she spotted the child. "Thank God, I've been looking everywhere for you." She gathered Emma into her arms, holding her tightly. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." "I'm sorry, Mama," Emma sobbed. I just wanted to see Miss Annie for Christmas. The woman stiffened slightly, then seemed to notice Colton for the first time. Deputy Shaw, she said, straightening, thank you for finding her. Mrs. Turner, Colton acknowledged with a nod. He knew the woman, slightly a widow who worked as a seamstress, raising Emma alone since her husband's death in a hunting accident 2 years earlier. I should get her home, Mrs. Turner said, already turning to leave. Mrs. Turner, Colton said, making a quick decision. If you don't mind my asking, who is Miss Annie? The woman's face paled slightly in the moonlight. I don't know what Emma's talking about. Children have such imaginations. Thank you again, Deputy. Merry Christmas. She hurried away, holding Emma's hand firmly, leaving Colton with more questions than answers. The mystery of Miss Annie nagged at him through the rest of his patrol and into Christmas Day, which he spent mostly alone, except for a brief visit to Sheriff Harlan's home, where he was kindly but awkwardly included in the family's celebration. The day after Christmas, Colton was surprised to find Olivia waiting for him outside the sheriff's office when he arrived for his morning shift. Deputy Shaw, she said, her voice tense. I was hoping I might have a word with you in private. Curious and somewhat wary, Colton unlocked the office door and ushered her inside. Once the door was closed, Olivia turned to him, her posture rigid. Mrs. Turner told me you were asking questions about a name Emma mentioned, she said without preamble. Miss Annie, Colton confirmed, watching her reaction carefully. Olivia's hands twisted together in front of her. I would appreciate it if you would refrain from pursuing that line of questioning further. Colton leaned against the desk, studying her face. Miss Blackett, I'm not in the habit of prying into people's private affairs without cause. But when a child is found crying alone on Christmas Eve, using a name that seems to upset both her mother and her teacher, I can't help but be concerned. Emma was not in any danger, Olivia said quickly. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding about what? Colton pressed gently. Who is Miss Annie? Olivia was silent for a long moment, internal conflict visible in her eyes. Finally, she sighed. I am, or I was, before I came to Silverridge. You changed your name. She nodded reluctantly. My full name is Olivia Ann Blackett. I went by Annie to friends in St. Louis. When I came west, I chose to use Olivia instead. Why? Colton asked, sensing there was much more to the story. Olivia's gaze dropped to the floor. I needed a fresh start, that's all. It wasn't all, Colton was certain of that, but he could see she wasn't ready to tell him more. He recognized the look in her eyes, the same haunted expression he sometimes saw in his own mirror. Mrs. Turner knew you before. In St. Louis, a nod. We were acquainted. I didn't know she had settled in Silverridge until after I arrived. By then, it seemed easier to maintain the separation between my past and present. Colton considered this, then made a decision. Your secret is safe with me, Miss Blackett, or Miss Ann, if you prefer. Relief flooded her features. Thank you, and I prefer Olivia now. It helps me remember who I am trying to become. As she turned to leave, Colton spoke again. For what it's worth, I understand needing to leave the past behind. Most folks out here are running from something or someone. The West is good for fresh starts. Olivia paused at the door, looking back at him with a new warmth in her gaze. Perhaps that's why we're all here, second chances. With a small smile that reached her eyes for once, she added, about that dinner invitation, if it still stands, I find my calendar open this evening. The hotel restaurant was quiet that evening, with most travelers having departed after the holiday. Colton and Olivia sat at a corner table, the awkwardness of their earlier conversation gradually giving way to more comfortable exchanges. How did you come to be a teacher? Colton asked as they finished their meal. It wasn't my original plan, Olivia admitted. I always thought I would follow my father into medicine somehow, but circumstances changed, and when I came west, teaching was one of the few respectable positions open to women. Do you enjoy it? A genuine smile lit her face. More than I ever expected to. There's something wonderful about watching a child grasp a new concept, seeing that moment of understanding dawn in their eyes. You're good with them, Colton observed. Patient, kind. Children deserve kindness, she said simply. The world will be hard enough on them later. They talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing cautious pieces of themselves while still maintaining certain boundaries. Colton spoke of his time in the Army, his years as a deputy in Arizona, and briefly mentioned his late wife and child without dwelling on the loss. Olivia shared stories of growing up in St. Louis, her father's medical practice, and her journey west 3 years earlier, though she remained vague about what had prompted her departure. As he walked her home through the starlit night, snow crunching beneath their boots, Colton felt more at peace than he had in years. There was something about Olivia that calmed the restlessness in his soul, even as she intrigued him with her mysteries. At her door, she turned to him with a shy smile. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Deputy Shaw." "Colton," he corrected gently. "When I'm not wearing the badge, I'd be honored if you'd call me Colton." "Colton," she repeated, testing the name. "Thank you, Colton. Good night." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Olivia." As January gave way to February, Colton and Olivia began spending more time together. They shared Sunday afternoon walks, quiet dinners, and conversations that gradually grew deeper and more honest. Colton found himself looking forward to these moments more than anything else, planning his patrols to pass by the schoolhouse when classes were ending and volunteering for any duties that might put him in Olivia's path. The town noticed, of course. In a place the size of Silverridge, little went unobserved. Most seemed pleased by the developing relationship between the deputy and the schoolteacher, though Colton detected occasional whispers and curious glances when he and Olivia were seen together. One cold February evening, as they sat by the fire in Olivia's small parlor, sharing a pot of tea and discussing a book she had lent him, Colton finally broached the subject that had been on his mind since Christmas. "Olivia," he began carefully, "I haven't pressed you about your past because I believe everyone deserves their privacy, but I sense there's something troubling you, something connected to St. Louis and why you left." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "You're right," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "There are things I haven't told you, things I've been afraid to share." "You can trust me," he said simply. Olivia met his gaze, searching his eyes for something. Whatever she found there seemed to give her courage. "I was married in St. Louis," she said, the words coming slowly at first. "His name was Charles Blackett, a businessman from a prominent family. We married when I was 19, and for the first year I thought I had everything I could want." Colton listened silently as she continued, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. Charles began to change. He became controlling, then cruel. At first it was just harsh words, criticism, isolating me from friends and family. Then came the physical abuse. She unconsciously touched her wrist, where Colton had previously noticed a faint scar. He was careful never to mark me where others could see. Anger flared in Colton's chest, but he kept his expression calm, not wanting to interrupt her story. "My father suspected, but Charles was respected in the community, and I was too ashamed to confirm his suspicions. Then I discovered I was with child." A sad smile touched her lips. "I was terrified, but also hopeful that a baby might change things, might bring back the man I thought I had married." She took a deep breath. The pregnancy was difficult. One night, after a particularly vicious argument, Charles pushed me down the stairs. I lost the baby, nearly died myself. "My God, Olivia," Colton whispered, his hands clenching into fists. "My father finally intervened then," she continued. "He helped me recover in secret, then arranged for me to visit relatives while he quietly secured a divorce on grounds of cruelty. It was scandalous, of course. A divorced woman in St. Louis society had few prospects. And Charles was furious, threatened to fine me to make me pay for humiliating him. So you came west, changed your name," she nodded. "My father had a colleague in Denver who helped arrange the teaching position here. I've been looking over my shoulder ever since, though as time passes, I've begun to hope Charles has forgotten about me." "Mrs. Turner," Colton said, understanding dawning, "she knew you in St. Louis." "Sarah Turner was my lady's maid," Olivia explained. She witnessed much of what happened and testified for the divorce proceedings. Charles dismissed her without references afterward. When she showed up in Silverridge with Emma a year after I arrived, it was like seeing a ghost. We agreed it would be safer for both of us if we maintained a distance publicly, though Emma sometimes forgets and calls me Miss Annie, as she did when she was very small. Colton reached across the small space between them, taking her hand in his. "Thank you for trusting me with this." "I should have told you sooner," she said, her eyes searching his face anxiously. "I understand if this changes things between us." "Changes things," he repeated, confused. "A divorced woman, Colton. It's not exactly respectable, especially for a schoolteacher, and if Charles ever found me." "Olivia," he interrupted gently, "nothing about what you've told me changes my feelings for you. If anything, knowing what you've survived only increases my admiration." Relief washed over her features and tears filled her eyes. "I've been so afraid to tell you. So afraid of losing what we've begun to build." Colton moved to sit beside her on the small sofa, still holding her hand. "You won't lose me, and as for Charles Blackett, if he ever shows his face in Silverridge, he'll have to deal with me." For the first time since they'd met, Olivia laughed freely, the sound warming Colton's heart. "My protective deputy," she said, her eyes shining with affection. Hesitantly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Colton leaned forward. Olivia met him halfway, their lips meeting in a soft, tender kiss that held promise of deeper feelings to come. As winter gradually released its grip on Silverridge, and spring brought new life to the mountain valley, Colton and Olivia's relationship blossomed. They no longer made any effort to hide their attachment, and the town accepted them as a couple, with most offering quiet congratulations or knowing smiles when they passed. Only Mrs. Turner remained cautious, pulling Colton aside after church one Sunday in early April. "Deputy Shaw," she said quietly, her expression serious, "I'm happy for Miss Blackett, truly I am. But you should know that her former husband is not a man to be underestimated. He has connections, resources, and a vindictive streak wider than the Mississippi." "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Turner," Colton replied, matching her serious tone, "but Olivia and I have discussed her past fully. I'm prepared for whatever may come." The seamstress studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps you are, just be vigilant. Charles Blackett is not a man who forgives what he perceives as slights to his honor." Colton took her warning seriously, though as spring turned to summer with no sign of trouble. He began to hope that Charles Blackett had indeed moved on with his life, perhaps finding another unfortunate woman to control. In July, during the town's Independence Day celebration, Colton took Olivia for a walk along the creek that ran behind the town, away from the crowds and noise of the festivities. Under a canopy of cottonwood trees, with the sound of water flowing over rocks providing a gentle backdrop, he knelt before her. "Olivia Ann Blackett," he said, taking her hands in his, "these past months have been the happiest of my life since I lost Clara and Thomas. I never thought I'd find love again, never thought I'd want to, but you've shown me that the heart has a remarkable capacity for healing and growth." Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes as she squeezed his hands. "I know neither of us came to Silverridge looking for this," Colton continued, "but I believe with all my soul that we were meant to find each other here. If you'll do me the great honor of becoming my wife, I promise to spend every day striving to be worthy of your trust and love." "Yes," Olivia whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Colton Shaw, I will marry you." As he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, all he could afford on a deputy's salary, she pulled him to his feet and into her arms, their kiss sealing the promise of a future together. The town of Silverridge celebrated the engagement of their deputy and schoolteacher with genuine pleasure. Plans were made for an August wedding at the White Church, with Reverend Thomas officiating. Even Sheriff Harland showed his approval by giving Colton 3 days off for a brief honeymoon trip to Denver. 2 weeks before the wedding, however, the peace that had settled over their lives was shattered. Colton was making his afternoon rounds when he noticed a fine carriage with Denver markings outside the hotel. New visitors weren't unusual, particularly in summer, but something about the expensive vehicle put him on alert. His instincts proved correct when, an hour later, a commotion at the schoolhouse drew him running. He arrived to find Olivia standing on the schoolhouse steps, her face pale but composed, confronting a well-dressed man whose back was to Colton. "You have no right to be here, Charles," Olivia was saying, her voice steady despite her evident distress. "Our marriage is over. The courts dissolved it legally 3 years ago." "A temporary setback, my dear," the man replied, his cultured voice carrying a note of dangerous charm. "I've come to bring you home where you belong. Your father's health is failing. Surely even you aren't cold-hearted enough to deny him the comfort of his daughter in his final days." "My father is perfectly well," Olivia countered. "I received a letter from him just last week." "Your lies haven't improved with age, Charles." Charles Blackett, for Colton, had no doubt this was the former husband, took a step closer to Olivia, who held her ground despite his intimidating presence. "You've led me on quite a chase, Annie," he said, his tone hardening. 3 years of searching, calling in favors, bribing postmasters to watch for letters. Did you really think you could hide from me forever? That I would allow my wife to live as a common schoolmarm in some backwater mining town? I am not your wife," Olivia stated firmly. "And I will never return to St. Louis with you." Charles raised his hand as if to strike her, and that was when Colton intervened, moving swiftly up the schoolhouse path. "That would be a mistake, sir," he said, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable threat. Blackett turned, revealing a handsome face marred by cold eyes and a contemptuous expression. He took in Colton's badge and gun with a dismissive glance. "This is a private matter between me and my wife, Deputy. I suggest you continue your patrol elsewhere." "Former wife," Colton corrected, positioning himself slightly in front of Olivia. "And as keeping the peace is my job, I'll be staying right here." Olivia placed a hand on Colton's arm. "It's all right, Colton. Mr. Blackett was just leaving." Charles's eyes narrowed as he observed the gesture and the familiarity of her tone. "I see," he said slowly. "You've not only abandoned your marriage vows but have taken up with the local law enforcement. How utterly predictable of you, Annie. Always seeking protection rather than standing on your own." "You should go now, Mr. Blackett," Colton said, his patience wearing thin. "Miss Blackett has made her wishes clear. There's nothing for you here." For a tense moment, it seemed Charles might challenge this, but then he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent a chill down Colton's spine. "Very well, Deputy. I know when I'm temporarily outmaneuvered. But this isn't over, Annie," he added, looking past Colton to Olivia. "I didn't spend 3 years searching for you to give up at the first obstacle." With that, he turned and walked away, his expensive boots raising small puffs of dust from the schoolyard path. Once he was out of earshot, Olivia's composure crumbled, and she began to tremble. Colton immediately took her into his arms, holding her steady. "He found me," she whispered against his chest. "After all this time, he found me. It's going to be all right," Colton assured her, though he felt far less confident than he sounded. "He can't force you to go with him. The law is on your side." Olivia pulled back slightly, looking up at him with fear in her eyes. "You don't know him, Colton. He doesn't accept defeat, and he doesn't care about the law when it contradicts what he wants." That evening, Colton and Sheriff Harland paid a visit to Charles Blackett at the hotel. They found him dining alone in the restaurant, seemingly unperturbed by their approach. "Gentlemen," he greeted them, dabbing at his mouth with a napkin. "Have you come to apologize for this afternoon's discourtesy? We've come to make the situation clear," Sheriff Harland stated bluntly. "Miss Blackett has established a life here in Silverridge. She's respected, valued, and protected. If you have legitimate business with her, you're welcome to conduct it through proper legal channels. Otherwise, I suggest you return to St. Louis." Blackett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And if I choose to remain in your charming town?" "Surely you can't prohibit a law-abiding citizen from taking up residence wherever he chooses." "No," the sheriff admitted, "but we can and will enforce the law rigorously against anyone who disturbs the peace or threatens our citizens." "Threatens?" Blackett raised his eyebrows in mock innocence. "I've threatened no one, Sheriff. I merely wish to speak with my former wife about family matters." "You're not welcome here, Blackett," Colton said, unable to contain his dislike for the man. "Olivia has made her choice clear." Blackett's gaze shifted to Colton, his eyes coldly assessing. Ah, yes, the gallant deputy. Tell me, does she still cry out in her sleep, still flinch at sudden movements? Some habits are hard to break, I've found. Colton's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Sheriff Harland placed a restraining hand on his arm. That's enough, the sheriff said sharply. Mr. Blackett, you've been warned. Deputy Shaw, we're done here. As they left the hotel, Sheriff Harland turned to Colton with concern etched on his weathered face. He's baiting you, son. Don't give him what he wants. What does he want? Colton asked, frustration evident in his voice. Control, the sheriff replied simply. Men like that, it's all about control. And right now, he can't stand that his former wife has slipped out of his grasp and found happiness without him. That night, Colton stayed at Olivia's house, sleeping on the sofa in her parlor despite the potential for gossip. Neither of them believed Charles Blackett would respect propriety or the law if he decided to confront Olivia again. Their fears proved justified shortly after midnight when the sound of breaking glass awakened them. Colton was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, as a rock came sailing through Olivia's front window. Stay here, he ordered, moving cautiously to the window and peering out. In the moonlight, he could make out a figure retreating quickly down the street. Without hesitation, Colton rushed outside, giving chase. The figure Blackett, he was certain, darted between buildings, leading Colton on a winding pursuit through the sleeping town. Finally, in an alley behind the livery stable, Colton caught up to him. Stop right there, Blackett, he commanded, his gun leveled at the man's back. Slowly, Charles Blackett turned, his hands raised slightly but his expression showing no fear. Deputy Shaw, how predictably heroic of you. Breaking windows in the middle of the night, Colton said disgustedly. Is this how a St. Louis gentleman behaves? I merely wanted to leave my former wife a message, Blackett replied smoothly. The rock had a note attached. Nothing threatening, I assure you, just a reminder of our shared history. You're under arrest for vandalism and disturbing the peace, Colton stated, motioning with his gun. Move toward the sheriff's office, slowly. Blackett complied, though his confident demeanor never wavered. This is a minor inconvenience, deputy. I'll pay whatever fine your backwater jurisdiction imposes, and then we'll continue our discussion. There won't be any more discussions, Colton said firmly. You'll be on the next stage out of Silverridge, or I'll find more serious charges to hold you on. A cold smile played across Blackett's face. You really have no idea who you're dealing with, do you? I have friends in Denver in the territorial government. One telegram, and your badge won't be worth the tin it's stamped from. Maybe, Colton acknowledged, but you'll still be gone from Silverridge, and Olivia will still be free of you. Something dangerous flashed in Blackett's eyes then, a glimpse of the true malice behind the cultured facade. No one is ever truly free of their past, Deputy Shaw, not you, not Annie. The sooner you both accept that, the easier things will be. Sheriff Harland was not pleased to be awakened in the middle of the night, but after hearing Colton's account, he agreed to hold Blackett until morning. They locked him in one of the 2 cells in the small jailhouse, ignoring his threats and demands to contact a lawyer. What do you think he'll do? Colton asked the sheriff as they stood outside the cell area, speaking in low tones. Pay the fine and leave town, most likely, Harland replied. But that doesn't mean he's given up. Men like Blackett play the long game. He might go away for now, but he'll be planning something. The wedding is in 10 days, Colton said, concern evident in his voice. Should we postpone? Sheriff Harland considered this, then shook his head. No. If anything, you should move it up. Once you're legally married, it'll be even harder for him to press any claims on Miss Blackett. The next morning, true to the sheriff's prediction, Charles Blackett paid the modest fine for vandalism without complaint, then announced his intention to depart on the afternoon stage to Denver. He made no attempt to see Olivia again, which only increased Colton's unease. It's too easy, he told Olivia as they sat in her parlor, the broken window now boarded up until the glazier could replace it. He didn't fight, didn't try to stay. That's what worries me, Olivia agreed, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. Charles never concedes defeat. He's planning something. After consulting with Reverend Thomas, they decided to move the wedding forward. 3 days later, in a simple ceremony attended only by Sheriff Harland, Mrs. Turner and Emma, and a few close friends, Colton and Olivia exchanged vows in the small white church. "I, Colton James Shaw, take thee, Olivia Ann Blackett, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and clear as he looked into her eyes. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Olivia's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the vows, but her eyes never left his, filled with a love that humbled him. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, Colton kissed his bride gently, sealing their bond with a promise of protection and devotion that went beyond words. Instead of the planned trip to Denver, they spent their wedding night in Colton's small cabin, both agreeing it would be safer to remain in Silverridge where they had friends and the law on their side. The following day, life returned to its normal rhythm, Olivia teaching at the schoolhouse, Colton performing his duties as deputy, though both remained vigilant for any sign of Charles Blackett's return. A week passed, then two, with no word or sight of Blackett. Gradually, they began to hope that perhaps he had indeed given up his pursuit, accepting finally that Olivia had built a new life beyond his reach. Then, on a warm September afternoon, as Colton made his rounds through town, a telegram arrived for Sheriff Harland. The sheriff read it with a deepening frown, then called Colton into the office. "There's trouble coming," he said without preamble, handing Colton the telegram. The message was brief but clear. Charles Blackett had filed a legal challenge in Denver, claiming that Olivia's divorce was invalid due to procedural errors. Furthermore, he was alleging that she had abandoned him without cause and was now living in sin with another man, having entered into a fraudulent second marriage. "Can he do this?" Colton asked, anger rising in his chest as he read the allegations. "He can try," Sheriff Harland replied grimly. "According to this, he's convinced a judge in Denver to issue a preliminary ruling in his favor. He's been appointed a legal guardian for Olivia's welfare until the case can be fully heard." "Guardian," Colton repeated incredulously. "She's a grown woman, not a child or an invalid." "The law sometimes treats women as little better than either," the sheriff said with disgust. "Especially when there's a wealthy, connected man pushing for it. According to this, Blackett is claiming Olivia is mentally unstable, that her delusions about abuse led her to flee a perfectly sound marriage." Colton crumpled the telegram in his fist. "I need to warn Olivia, she's still at the schoolhouse." "Go," Sheriff Harland nodded. "But keep your wits about you, son. This is exactly the kind of reaction Blackett is hoping for. He wants you to do something rash that will support his claims." Colton moved swiftly through town toward the schoolhouse, his mind racing. As he approached, he saw that classes had been dismissed for the day, the children already dispersed to their homes. He entered to find Olivia at her desk, grading papers in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. She looked up with a smile that quickly faded as she saw his expression. "What's happened?" Carefully, trying to control his anger, Colton explained the contents of the telegram. Olivia listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word, but her composure remained intact. "I feared something like this," she said when he had finished. "Charles has friends in the territorial courts. Money and influence can accomplish a great deal, even against the truth." "What can we do?" Colton asked, taking her hands across the desk. Olivia thought for a moment, then squared her shoulders with determination. "We fight. Legally, properly, I have documentation of the divorce proceedings, certified copies that my father insisted I bring with me, and there are witnesses to Charles's abuse, Mrs. Turner being one of them." "Will they be enough against Blackett's influence?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I won't run again, Colton. I can't spend my life looking over my shoulder waiting for him to appear. We have truth on our side, and that has to count for something." Her courage strengthened his resolve. "We'll face this together," he promised. "Whatever comes." They spent that evening making plans, reviewing the divorce documents Olivia had kept hidden in a locked box beneath a floorboard in her bedroom. The papers appeared to be in order, though neither of them was versed enough in legal matters to know if there were technical flaws that Blackett might exploit. "We need a lawyer," Colton said finally. "Someone who can navigate the territorial courts and stand against whatever legal maneuvers Blackett attempts." "Lawyer Simmons in Denver," Sheriff Harland suggested when they consulted him the next morning. "He's handled cases for me before. Honest man, doesn't back down from a fight." "I'll telegraph him today." For the next several days, they waited anxiously for word from Denver. Life continued in its outward patterns, Olivia teaching, Colton performing his duties, but beneath the surface, tension coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. The response finally came in the form of lawyer Simmons himself, arriving on the stage from Denver with a portfolio of documents and a determined expression. After introductions at the sheriff's office, the lawyer laid out the situation frankly. "Mr. Blackett has indeed filed a petition claiming the divorce was improperly executed," he confirmed, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the papers. His primary argument rests on a technicality that the St. Louis court lacked jurisdiction because he was traveling on business when the papers were served. "That's absurd," Olivia protested. "He was deliberately avoiding service. The court allowed alternate service precisely because of his evasion tactics." Lawyer Simmons nodded. "Which is exactly what we will argue. I've reviewed your documentation, Mrs. Shaw, and it appears sound to me. The St. Louis court was thorough in establishing grounds for divorce based on cruelty." "What about this guardianship nonsense?" Colton asked, still infuriated by the very concept. "A temporary measure only," Simmons assured them, "and one we can challenge immediately. The Denver judge who granted it did so without a full hearing based solely on Mr. Blackett's persuasive petition. Once we present countervailing evidence, I believe it will be dismissed. And if it isn't?" Olivia asked quietly. The lawyer's expression grew serious. "Then we appeal to a higher court. This may take time, Mrs. Shaw, but the law is ultimately on your side. Your former husband is attempting to use wealth and connections to circumvent justice. But such tactics can only delay, not deny, the truth." That night, as they lay in bed in Colton's cabin now, their shared home, Olivia voiced the fear that had been growing since lawyer Simmons's visit. "What if the courts rule against us, Colton? What if they declare our marriage invalid and order me to return to Charles as his wife?" Colton pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Then we'll leave. Go somewhere beyond Blackett's reach, California, Oregon, even Canada if necessary." "I won't let him take you back, Olivia, not ever." "I don't want to run again," she whispered. "I want to build our life here in Silverridge. Then we'll fight with everything we have," he promised. "But know that whatever happens, wherever we end up, we'll face it together." The legal battle commenced in earnest the following week, with lawyer Simmons filing counterclaims in the Denver court and presenting evidence of the legitimate divorce proceedings. Mrs. Turner provided a sworn affidavit detailing the abuse she had witnessed during Olivia's marriage to Charles Blackett. Even Reverend Thomas contributed a character statement attesting to Olivia's sound mind and moral standing in the community. Charles Blackett, for his part, remained in Denver, orchestrating his legal campaign from a distance, a tactic that only increased Colton's suspicion that the man's true aim was to punish Olivia rather than genuinely reclaim her as his wife. October turned to November, and still, the matter remained unresolved. Lawyer Simmons reported progress. The guardianship order had been suspended pending further hearings, but the core question of the divorce's validity continued to wind its way through the territorial court system. Then, on a cold November morning, as the first snow of winter dusted the mountains around Silverridge, Olivia made a discovery that changed everything. "Colton," she said, her voice filled with wonder as he returned home from his morning patrol. "I'm with child." Joy unlike anything he had ever known surged through Colton as he gathered his wife into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "A baby," he breathed against her hair. "Our baby." Olivia's laughter, bright and free, filled the small cabin. For a moment, the shadow of Charles Blackett and the ongoing legal battle receded, replaced by the simple, profound happiness of two people who had found each other against all odds, now creating new life together. As Olivia's condition became known in town, support for the couple grew even stronger. The thought of a court potentially separating an expectant mother from her lawful husband struck most citizens of Silverridge as not merely unjust but cruel. Letters and telegrams from townspeople began arriving at the territorial governor's office, protesting Blackett's legal maneuverings. Whether due to public pressure or the merits of their case, 2 weeks before Christmas, Lawyer Simmons arrived on the stage from Denver with welcome news. "The court has ruled," he announced as they gathered in Sheriff Harlan's office. "The St. Louis divorce is upheld as valid and properly executed. Mr. Blackett's petition is denied in full, and your marriage, Mrs. Shaw, is recognized as lawful and binding." Relief washed over them like a cleansing rain. Olivia, now showing slightly with their child, wept happy tears as Colton held her close. "Is it over?" she asked Lawyer Simmons. "Truly over." "Mr. Blackett has the right to appeal, of course," the lawyer replied honestly. "But given the comprehensive nature of the court's ruling, any such appeal would likely fail." And, he added with a small smile, "My sources indicate that Mr. Blackett's influence in Denver has been somewhat diminished of late. It seems his persistent harassment of a respectable schoolteacher has not endeared him to certain key officials whose wives were educated women themselves." Charles Blackett departed Denver the following week, returning to St. Louis without further attempts to contact Olivia. Though they remained cautious for a time, as months passed with no word or sign of him, they gradually allowed themselves to believe that this chapter of their lives had finally closed. Spring arrived in Silverridge, bringing with it green hillsides dotted with wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Olivia, now in her 6th month of pregnancy, had reluctantly stepped back from full-time teaching, though she continued to offer piano lessons from their home. Colton had been promoted to senior deputy after Sheriff Harlan announced his intention to retire the following year. The position came with a modest raise that allowed them to begin construction on a larger home on the outskirts of town, with room for their growing family. On a warm day in late May, Colton returned home from his patrol to find Olivia sitting on their small porch, a letter in her hands and tears on her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, dropping to one knee before her. "Nothing's wrong," she assured him, wiping at her tears with a smile. "It's from my father. Charles Blackett is dead." Colton took a moment to absorb this news. "How? A duel of all things," Olivia said, shaking her head in disbelief. "He insulted the honor of a young woman at a social gathering and her brother challenged him. Father says Charles had been drinking heavily in recent months, growing increasingly erratic and hostile. Few in St. Louis society would still receive him." Though Colton felt no grief for the man who had caused Olivia so much pain, neither did he feel it appropriate to celebrate another's death. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Olivia considered the question seriously. "I am," she said finally. "I feel free, truly free for the first time in years. It's as if a weight I'd grown so accustomed to carrying that I barely noticed it anymore has suddenly been lifted." She placed her hands on her rounded belly, where their child grew strong and healthy. "Now we can look forward without shadows from the past darkening our future." 3 months later, on a hot August afternoon, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Clara Sarah Shaw, honoring both Colton's first wife and Mrs. Turner, who had served as midwife for the delivery. Little Clara thrived, growing from a tiny, red-faced infant into a curious, laughing baby with her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin. She became the center of their world, bringing joy not only to their home but to the entire community of Silverridge, where she was doted upon by honorary aunts and uncles from the schoolhouse to the sheriff's office. By the time Clara was approaching her 4th birthday, Sheriff Harlan had finally made good on his retirement plans, and Colton had been elected as his replacement. Olivia had returned to teaching part-time, bringing Clara with her to school on the days she worked. Their new home, A comfortable two-story house with a wide porch and room for guests had become a gathering place for friends and a haven for their family. On a bright spring morning, as Colton prepared to leave for his day's duties, now wearing the sheriff's star instead of the deputy's badge, he paused in the doorway of the kitchen where Olivia was helping Clara with her breakfast. "I'm heading out," he said, buckling on his gun belt. "Anything you need from town?" Before Olivia could respond, Clara looked up from her porridge. "Can you bring candy, please, Sheriff Daddy?" she asked with an angelic smile that Colton found nearly impossible to resist. "Clara," Olivia admonished gently, "what did we say about asking for treats before dinner?" The little girl's face fell slightly. "That it spoils my appetite," she recited dutifully, then brightened. "But maybe just a small candy." Colton chuckled, crossing the room to drop a kiss on his daughter's dark curls. "We'll see, little one. Be good for your mother today." "I will," Clara promised, then added innocently, "Mama, I mean Miss Annie," before returning to her breakfast. Colton froze, his eyes meeting Olivia's across the table. It was the first time they had ever heard Clara use that name, Olivia's former name, which she herself never used anymore, and which even Mrs. Turner had long since abandoned in favor of Mrs. Shaw. "Clara, honey," Olivia said carefully, "why did you call me that?" The child looked confused. "That's what Emma calls you sometimes when we play school. She says you used to be Miss Annie before you were Mama." Olivia relaxed slightly, understanding dawning. Emma Turner, now a girl of 10, occasionally helped watch Clara when both Colton and Olivia were busy. Evidently, some childhood memories had been shared during their play. "That was a long time ago," Olivia explained gently, "before you were born, before I married your father. My name is Olivia Shaw now, though some people used to call me Annie." "Oh," Clara said, accepting this with a child's easy adaptability. "Can I finish my porridge now?" Olivia nodded, exchanging a smile with Colton, who had watched the interaction with a mixture of surprise and tenderness. They had agreed long ago that when Clara was older, they would tell her the truth about their pasts, about Clara's namesake and Thomas, about Charles Blackett and the struggles that had brought them together. But for now, she was too young to understand such complexities. The cowboy walked in on his daughter saying, "Mama, I mean Miss Annie," and smiled quietly. In that simple moment of childhood confusion, he saw the threads of their lives woven together, past and present, sorrow and joy, endings and beginnings, all culminating in this peaceful kitchen with the woman he loved and the child they had created. "I'll be home for dinner," he said, leaning down to kiss Olivia goodbye. "I love you." "I love you too," she replied, her eyes shining with the contentment of a woman who had found her place in the world after years of searching. As Colton stepped out into the sunshine, adjusting his hat against the bright Montana day, he felt a sense of completion he had never thought to experience again after the tragedies of his earlier life. Silverridge had become more than just another stop on a restless journey. It had become home, the place where broken pieces had been made whole again, where love had flourished in unlikely soil. Sheriff Colton Shaw walked down the path toward town, toward his duties and responsibilities, knowing that when the day was done, he would return to the two people who had made his life complete once more. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the Montana sky, he liked to think that Clara, his first wife, and little Thomas were smiling down, approving of the family he had found and the love he had rediscovered in this corner of the wild, beautiful West. The years would bring more children, a son named James who arrived 2 years after Clara, and twins, Sarah and Thomas, 3 years after that, along with the ordinary joys and sorrows of a life well lived. Silverridge would grow from a mining town into a proper small city, with Colton serving as sheriff for nearly 2 decades, before finally hanging up his badge to focus on the ranch they had established outside of town. Olivia would eventually become the principal of Silverridge School, guiding generations of children with the same patience and compassion she had shown her own. The shadows of her past with Charles Blackett faded with time, though she never forgot the lessons learned in those dark days, lessons about strength, resilience, and the capacity to begin anew. And on quiet evenings, when their children were grown with families of their own, Colton and Olivia would sit together on the porch of their home, hands clasped as they watched the sun set over the mountains, grateful for the twisted path of fate that had brought them together in Silverridge all those years ago. Two people who had lost everything, finding in each other the courage to love again. A deputy and a schoolteacher. A family forged from broken pieces. A love story written across the canvas of the American West, enduring through all the seasons of their lives together.